Hi, this is Burr Stewart, and welcome to part 44 of my continuing series of operations videos on the HO-scaled Burlington Northern. Today we're going to have a miscellaneous bunch of runs, different trains. You see here some of Brian Elchlepp's super detailed locomotives, some switching moves, the Pacific Zip, along with an occasional bang! Non-stop passenger service between London and Seattle. More of Brian's beautiful locomotives, including one decorated for the Bicentennial in 1776, and a Union Pacific transfer freight working the Argo yard in South Seattle for the first time on this screen. So if you're in the mood for some HO scale rail fanning, let's dive right in. Here we have one of my favorite locomotives, NP number 187, a SW 1200 switcher, pulling a cut of oil tank cars over to the Mukilteo area on my layout under the control of Dave Enger, and he's going to do some switching over there. We don't have time today for the narrow gauge operation. That'll be for a different video.
It sounds different.
Nice that he's blowing the horn for the grade crossing. I've noticed the operators are doing that more frequently now. In the foreground, you can see the Department of Defense facility that he's switching out. I'm not going to show you the entire switching operation, but you can imagine that he has to pull those tank cars out of those two spurs and then put the cars he's got with him into them. Meanwhile, in order to make room for some other operations, we had to reposition the Pacific Zip. This is the Burlington Northern's original intermodal train, as Tofsy and Cofsy trailers on flat car and containers on flat car became popular in the early 70s. They also included an express box car, which this is only a stand-in for, but that was an important part of the traffic as well. Meanwhile, in South Seattle, the switcher is working. Bang! Dave has been trying out the proto throttle for this run. He's coming back from Mukilteo to Everett's Bayside yard and pulling his cars into the yard to be sorted, sent on their way.
I'll show you though.
Another nice grade crossing blow. I tell you, things are really looking up around here. What's not to like? We have bangs, horn blows, locomotives, cars, track, and even bells. Well, here comes a 4,000 horsepower Deltec locomotive powering the London to Seattle Express, brought to us by Robin Peel. These models are actually an 00 scale, which is 1 foot equals 76 feet, but the British passenger cars are smaller in profile, so they fit right in with the HO scale layout. You'll get a chance to examine each of these passenger coaches in detail when they come around to the Interbay yard in a minute. A few minutes later, the passenger train is coming through Everett's Bayside yard. I'm trying to convince him to stop for passengers, but he won't buy it. At least he blew for the grade crossing. Are you stopping for passengers? Fortunately, the swing dancers on the station platform are having so much fun they don't really care that they missed the train.
That's true.
Following British practice, Robin is very fond of left-hand running on this section of double-track mainline. Later in the session, we switched him over to right-hand running, which he didn't really appreciate, but you'll see in some future video shots. For example, right here in Inner Bay Yard, I set up my AKASO action cam on a little tripod so you can examine the size of each of these passenger cars in more detail if you're interested. I don't know about you, but those engines look a little restless to me on the engine facility there. Here comes the passenger special, blowing right underneath the Dravis Street overpass. What a weird sounding horn. My goodness. Robin tells me that in England, all of the highway grade crossings are fully protected, so the locomotives don't have to have headlights and they don't have to blow their horns. I guess I'll take his word for it, but it seems strange to go by all these grade crossings without blowing his horn. By now you must be sick of me blowing my horn about other people blowing their horns. Whatever. It's a nice looking passenger train though, if you're a fan of passenger trains. A few minutes later we have Brian Elchlepp's C425, two of them actually, with the elongated fuel tanks that he was running around the layout. Beautiful engines. You've seen the Alco and RS3 and GP35 before. But it's a treat to be able to watch these locomotives. In a few minutes we'll put some cars behind them and make it look a little more like a train. We have the Empire Builder passenger train in the middle of the Stacy Street yard today because we want to do some switching work over in Argo yard where it normally sits. Meanwhile, Scott is running the switch engine in Stacy Street. Shoving that Milwaukee car eventually to Pier 24, which was a transit shed on the waterfront of Seattle. That retaining wall is a Chooch product, and Dave Enger built the road using styrene sheet.
No, I did not. I decided it would be better to just let the other people run for today. Generally I bring my SP&S one. Where do you go to school? I go to school in Elderly. Overlay, okay.
I was all set to do a bang here, but it turns out that he was running past that cut of cars. Such a lost opportunity.
Yeah, I'm here.
Well, now Brian's locomotives have made it up to the Samish River Bridge, which is a part of the layout that was built by the late Paul Scholes. And we still have these four engines lashed up with an SP&S caboose on the rear, which was a recent brass import by Ed Austin. Beautiful car. One of these days I have to get around to ballasting that track, don't I? After another few minutes to run around the layout, this consist of Brian's locomotives made it back around to this Burlington yard. And we had some cars there to pick up, so we did a little bit of switching in the yard. We can watch this for a minute. This is pulling the train out of the yard track in Burlington, and then we're going to shove it back onto the caboose, and then we'll take it around the layout and show some video of the same train from several other angles. There he's flipping the switch to go back onto the caboose. That Canatex tank car that's going by was weathered very nicely by J.J. Johnson, who's a well-known modeler in the Seattle area. And these next several cars haven't made it to the weathering shop yet, but you can see that I did at least paint the rims of the wheels and the truck side frames. I try to do at least that with every car that I put on the layout. Paint the side frames and the wheels. Now that I've said that, I expect you to notice when I failed to do so, and you see a shiny wheel on a freight car. If we zoom in on this switching move, we can enjoy Paul Scholl's scenery work and the backpackers he placed at the grade crossing. Very nice. Those gray hoppers in the background are Northwest Olivine, which was a producer of fine sand on the concrete branch that came out of Burlington. We kind of skipped the air brake test, but we were in a hurry, I guess. Brian puts super bright LEDs in his headlights, which I really like. The way it looks now, this is a northbound train leaving the Burlington yard and heading towards Bellingham staging. But today we're just running trains around the room, so we're going to use the illegal cutoff between Bellingham and Skykomish, and this train will then run from Skykomish down to Everett and Seattle as if it was an eastern train. But for right now, it's a northbound train. Meanwhile, through the trees there, you can see Robin's Deltec powered passenger special is still running the miles on the layout. Coming through the Delta yard right now, on its way back into Inner Bay one more time. I'll speed up this clip so we don't have to spend too much time watching it. After another pass around the layout, the passenger train ended up on the low line next to Brian's train. Seems like a fitting tribute to the recent passing of Queen Elizabeth.
It's the first time in history.
It's like when the Royal Scotsman came.
A lot of horsepower here. Well, the way we have the layout set up now, the two trains are diverging because Brian's train is taking the alternate leg of Delta Y and heading from the Delta yard up towards Canada, while the British passenger train has continued along the coast down towards Seattle.
so sorry. Stepped right in.
Meanwhile, Brian's gotten out his Bicentennial locomotive and is getting ready to put that into a consist with a couple of the other BN units.
I was gonna ask you, we have power that we're looking to cut off.
And here we get to see that Bicentennial unit flashed up with these two BN units. Looks like I'm having a problem with the hopper cars though. We got a derailment there. Well, we fixed it by putting those two lightweight cars that were at the front of the train at the rear of the train, and so we didn't have any more derailment problems. Here's the train a little while later climbing back up towards Skycomish on the ledge above the Everett Bayside yard and below the narrow gauge main line. After a brief tunnel, we head across my homage to the Mason Creek trestle, I guess it is. Great rail fanning spot if you're ever up on Highway 2 near Stevens Pass. It's actually on the east side of Stevens Pass, but here we have it modeled on the west side. Same mountain range anyway. We get to enjoy some nice rock mold work by Eric Van Nice, did a few years ago. I didn't really have room in the basement for this much train layout, so I had to come up with some strange approaches. One of them is this line which goes up towards Skycomish is on the top of a knife ridge scenic divider between the two scenes on the lower deck there. But it works pretty well. It's disguised with big fir trees and it gets the job done, even though it's not the full-on scenic treatment you might want. And also behind the train as it's crawling along the hillside there, behind and below it is a 7-track staging yard representing Tacoma and Portland and Auburn to the south. It's a hidden staging yard, but I can remove all the tracks in the Skycomish staging yard in order to reach down under there if I need to. It very rarely happens. But still, I'm not recommending hidden staging yards. Well, a little later, now headed southbound from Bellingham down to Seattle, crossing the Skagit River Bridge. We wind past the Mount Vernon Depot. On the second unit, you can see the wrong fuel tank that Brian installed on that Alco C425. That unit is an older Atlas model that he detailed and weathered. And now Brian's Bicentennial unit moves across the Stillaguamish River Bridge. Further down the line, that same train approaches the Delta Y in Everett. Unlike the rocks we saw earlier, these rock cliffs were made just using a rasp on some blue extruded styrene foam. and then painted with latex paint and stained with rock colors. It doesn't look as good as rocks made with plaster, but it goes pretty quickly, which is important when you have this big layout. The train is spooling down now because Brian is going to remove these locomotives from the layout, take them home. So we're just going to watch this train pull into the yard through a crossover. Always fun to watch. One of my favorite views of any train. We're crossing over from the main to the side track so that these cars won't be in the way of some other train after he removes the locomotives. Drones weren't invented in 1973, but let's pretend we have one and we go up and take a nice aerial view of that maneuver. Beautiful. For our final act today, Aidan Murray brings in a trio of Union Pacific locomotives hauling a transfer run between the Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern to take place here at Argo Yard. You can see he's running the train at a reasonable speed, but I'm going to speed up a lot of this video so that it doesn't take us too long to watch the switching operation. What we're going to be doing is pulling his transfer train onto the main line, which he's doing here. Then he's going to uncouple the locomotives, run around the train, and then pull the train back in order to pick up cars in the Argo yard to the left of his train there, pull them out, put them on the main, transfer his own cars that he brought in back to the same track in Argo yard, and eventually leave with the caboose on the end of the train. So it's a full-on exchange one train for another and put the caboose on the back of the train and the engines on the opposite side. So I hope you find it interesting to watch. Like I said, I'll speed it up so that it doesn't take us too long. But that explains some of the garbled speech you're hearing in the background. Now that he's pulled the train far enough forward, you can see the tracks in the Argo yard to the left. And the cars that we need that are designated for the Union Pacific, the UP, are on the middle track in that yard. There you see he's bringing the engines around and back up on the second main line to run around the train. Here's the actual speed he was running at. That lead unit didn't exist in 1973, but it's standing in for a future GP30. Once he gets past the turnout to the left of the camera, he'll be able to saw back over a couple of crossovers and get into the Argo yard. As you can see, Aidan is setting up there. The center track in the yard, track 3, is the one with the green covered hopper on it. And that's the track we'll be putting our incoming train into after we pull everything in there out. I could complain about Aidan using his fingers to uncouple the cars, but it is underneath a ledge, so I'll forgive him this time. Besides, by now you know this is reality model railroading here on this channel. Thanks to this camera angle, we'll be able to inspect this train. Here's a couple of Boeing skybox cars, otherwise known as tool cars. Some empty tanks going back south to California. An empty log flat, gondola, and an NP covered hopper, all headed south on the Union Pacific. Now, as you can see, we've pulled onto the entire incoming train with our entire outgoing train, and the caboose is sandwiched in the middle. This is a very typical and clever maneuver so that once we drop all of the incoming cars to the right of the caboose will then be left on the right end of our new train and we'll be able to depart towards the left. The bulkhead flat with the log loads I got from Jim Betts, who told me that there was a famous forest fire that created a bunch of logs that needed to be quickly disposed of, and so they shipped it to a sawmill that was willing to process burned logs. The black car there is carbon black for one of the local printing presses. Who knows what's in the refrigerator car? Actually, there are a couple of those refrigerator cars. Maybe it's beer. Well, there goes the caboose. All we have to do is drop this incoming cut there on track 3, and we can head back towards the Union Pacific.
Yeah, now I'm finally out. I am heading home.
Well, that switching maneuver was well done. And now we can fade off to the left with two mighty competitors in the same frame, the Burlington Northern switcher on the lower right and the Union Pacific caboose, with the slogan, "Get up and go." An obvious pun on the UP, up. I wonder if there was ever a railroad with the initials DOWN. How about the Delaware, Ohio, and Western Nebraska Railroad? But I digress. That's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and this is Burr Stewart wishing you much fun with trains.